The final hours of Ramiro Felix Gonzales. What he revealed changed everything. Dear friends, today we step into a story that began with a young woman's sudden disappearance and ended more than 2 decades later inside Texas's most infamous execution chamber. It's a case where the answers came from the last place anyone expected, a prison cell. Ramiro Felix Gonzales was already serving time for a violent crime when, out of nowhere, he told guards he knew where Bridget Townsend was. At first, it sounded like a cruel game, filled with shifting stories and false leads. But when the truth finally came out, it revealed a chilling account of desperation, violence, and a shallow grave hidden for years. And in a twist heavy with symbolism, his execution date would fall on Bridget's birthday. Tonight, we follow his final day, his last words, and the long road that brought him to the gurney. Stay with me, this is one you won't forget. On the evening of the 26th of June, 2024, inside the walls of the Huntsville unit, the air was thick with a tension that only comes on execution nights. For the condemned, 41-year-old Ramiro Felix Gonzales, the moment had been more than 2 decades in the making. But the story of how he arrived here didn't start with his last walk. It began in January 2001, in a small Texas town where an 8-year-old girl named Bridget Townsend vanished without a trace. Bridget was the kind of young woman who drew people in, bright, determined, with plans that reached far beyond her rural hometown. But on the 15th of January, she simply disappeared. No calls, no goodbyes, just gone. Her family reported her missing immediately, knowing this wasn't the kind of girl who ran away. Search teams combed the county. Flyers went up. Days turned to weeks, then months, and eventually years. The case grew cold. What no one knew then was that the truth, every disturbing detail, was sitting in a prison cell less than 200 miles away. Ramiro Gonzales had already been locked up for a separate violent crime, the kidnapping and assault of another young woman. At 18, his life had already veered into darkness, fueled by a turbulent childhood and years of drug abuse. 3 years into his sentence, without warning, Gonzales told a prison guard he needed to speak to investigators. He claimed he knew where Bridget's body was buried. At first, it seemed like a desperate attempt for attention. His story was bizarre, filled with shifting details. But under steady questioning, the facade cracked, and Gonzales admitted the truth. He had gone to Bridget's house looking for drugs. She answered the door alone. He forced his way in, abducted her, and drove her to a remote location. According to his own account, she pleaded for her life, but he ignored her. He assaulted her, then shot her twice in the head with a .357 Magnum. He buried her in a field, covered the site, and walked away. No remorse, no hesitation, just silence. When investigators escorted Gonzales back to the site years later, dawn was breaking over the brushland of Medina County. Shackled, he led them across dry soil and pointed to the spot. As they dug, pieces of Bridget's life emerged, fragments of clothing, a plastic bag, and then the bones. Her skull bore the bullet wounds that told the final chapter of her life. There was no doubt anymore. In court, prosecutors painted Gonzales as a predator who acted with cold calculation. His defense tried to frame his actions in the light of a broken upbringing, absent father, addicted mother, and exposure to drugs before he was even a teenager. But the jury didn't see damage. They saw danger. The verdict came quickly. Guilty of capital murder. The sentence, death. Years passed on death row. Appeals were filed and denied. Gonzales began to change, or at least, that's what he claimed. He read scripture. He spoke to chaplains. He wrote letters to Bridget's family, apologizing for the life he took. Some believed him. Others thought it was an act, a performance, by a man trying to shape how the world remembered him. Then, in early 2024, Texas issued a final death warrant. The date they set carried a haunting significance, the 26th of June, Bridget Townsend's birthday. Her mother called it a gift from the state, a symbolic closing of a painful circle. In his final days, Gonzales followed the quiet routine of death row. Meals served through a slot, minimal contact with others, letters in and out. On the morning of the 26th of June, he met with his spiritual advisor. They prayed together, and Gonzales said he was ready. Because Texas no longer allows special last meals, his final dinner was the same as every other inmate's that day. Chicken fried steak with gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans, and sweet tea. No feast, no ceremony, just a tray slid through the door. At 6 p.m., prison staff escorted Gonzales from his cell at the Polunsky unit to the Huntsville unit, home to Texas's execution chamber. He wore white prison-issued clothing, hands and ankles shackled. The walk from the holding cell to the gurney was short, but for the condemned, it was the longest walk of their life. Witnesses gathered behind the glass, journalists, state officials, and members of Bridget's family, including her brother David and her mother Patricia. On the other side, Gonzales lay on the gurney, arms strapped down, IV lines running to both arms. When the warden asked if he had any last words, Gonzales spoke clearly. "I want to say I'm sorry. I took someone precious from this world. Bridget, I know I can't make this right, but I hope you found peace. To her family, I pray you heal. I pray God gives you strength. I was lost, but I found faith. I'm ready to go home now." There was no wavering in his voice, no anger, no excuses. Whether it was true remorse or simply the final performance of a long sentence, only Gonzales knew for sure. At 6:50 p.m., a single dose of pentobarbital entered his system. He exhaled deeply, blinked several times, then went still. Less than a minute later, he was pronounced dead. Outside the prison, David Townsend told reporters, "Justice is done. This has been a long and painful journey. He can say he changed, but we remember what he did. Now, it's over." Patricia, Bridget's mother, was more direct. "I don't forgive him. A lot of people have hard childhoods they don't kill. He made his choice, and he got what he deserved." And for Gonzales's attorneys, the day carried a different weight. In their statement, they described him as a deeply spiritual, generous, and intentional man, filled with remorse and transformed by years of self-reflection. But the state saw only the crime. The brutality of that January day in 2001 outweighed any claims of redemption. By nightfall, the prison yard was silent again. Gonzales became the 8th person executed in the United States in 2024, and the 2nd from Texas that year. His death marked the end of a case that spanned 23 years, a case filled with lies, violence, desperation, and, in the end, a late apology that Bridget's family could not accept. And for them, the 26th of June will forever be a day with two memories: the joy of Bridget's birth and the finality of the man who took her life leaving this world. Bridget Townsend's story is one of promise stolen far too soon. A young life ended in a way that left a hole no apology could fill. For more than 2 decades, her family carried the weight of her absence, through birthdays, holidays, and milestones she never got to see. Ramiro Felix Gonzales claimed that faith had changed him, that his confession was meant to bring peace. But for Bridget's loved ones, peace was never his to give. On the 26th of June, 2024, her birthday, the state of Texas closed the final chapter. Justice, they said, had been served. Yet justice does not erase grief, and closure does not erase loss. Tonight, as we remember Bridget, we're reminded that every choice leaves a mark, and some scars never fade.